My name is Christopher Lowe. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Session today is talking about leveraging open source, and honestly, I'm going to invite you to ask questions as we go. I noticed in the program this is considered a session for industry only, which intrigued me a little bit. I assume there are guards at the door keeping everyone else out. So I want to shift the topic today. The slides I assume will be made available to you at some point, and I'll caveat they were slides by engineers for engineers. I want to talk more though for you as industry about why we are doing what we're doing rather than what we did or what are the widgets and the details of the tech, but to talk about the business challenges that we face at USDA and how that led to some tool choices and operational choices around USDA and our security program. So I've been the CISO at USDA for 4 years and change. I was the SOC director before that. I had the privilege to actually stand up the SOC starting in 2009. We had an appropriation from the Hill. We got to build from, pretty much from scratch because USDA before that did not have an enterprise level security entity. They had a compliance team, but nothing operational. And so building that is what we did. And the first round of that was what did it take to build a SOC? And at the time, I came in like every hard charger after 20 plus years in industry, and we bought a commercial solution. My chief of engineering at the time spent several months with the prime and the subs locked up off-site, basically to ensure that we could build a solution that all the tools worked together, all the tools fed the SIM, and all the lights turned green when we called it delivered. And it did, and it ran for several years. But pretty quickly on, we started running into a couple of challenges. The first was technical. We found, the speed of change in industry and products and what they do exceeded what we anticipated would be the challenge of keeping those all integrated into a single SIM solution. So we started losing bits of data as time went on. We started losing pieces, products and definitions that, things were agreed to and that our taxonomy in the first version didn't fit anymore. So aggregating data was a challenge. USDA, I should say, is a loosely federated department. We are 34 agencies and offices. We are in every county in the U.S. and 104 countries overseas. We are, a diverse set of missions over 155 years that have grown up around everything that, from the things you expect, like farming, to the nation's 8th largest bank in our loan programs. We fight fires. We do radiological, chem bio, and anthrax. Who doesn't love a good anthrax story? We have risks around commodity markets in the billions of dollars. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in research and cutting edge pharmacology and food technologies. There's a lot of interesting targets at USDA, and each of them have their own appropriation and their own support and their own IT and their own IT infrastructure. So when we say we're trying to do security as a department, that's a bit of a stretch. So yes, trying to keep all the data from all the sources coming together makes sense, made for a challenge. Second, talk about the funding. Technology has a challenge that it tends to get more expensive at time because vendors have built into products expectations of growth and the need to kind of keep renovating every so often. Government has this idea that once you fix a budget level, that's pretty much all it will ever be. And so as you move on and say, well, we want to add this functionality, there has to be money attached to each piece of new work, and our model did not have that. But I think a bigger challenge was really about the people that were running our program. I got to staff up as a SOC director with a whole new set of people. I had my intern squad, GS 7911s, I had mid-range folks, I had some senior folks. And what I quickly found is when I brought them in and trained them to this new set of tools, and they said, they worked and they learned for a year or two, they said thanks, and then I started having those conversations going, yeah, I can make a whole lot more outside. I can make a whole lot more going to another agency. Sad to say, but yes, I got poached by some folks who are more on the front lines of cyber than, let's face it, USDA is kind of a backwater, if you will, in terms of what people think of as cutting-edge cybersecurity work. So when they get the call from DHS or NSA or whomever, yeah, and it's a great argument for the buy too. They're getting someone who's, fairly young, new to the career, trained up, and they can offer a lot more. So we realized the challenge of keeping folks engaged was really giving me a whole lot of heartburn. But you can't necessarily run, what you're trying to do with just the skills of the vendors. You also need the contract team. And in our budget world, as this is industry, right? You all know painfully well, when money gets tight, we look to cut the contracts. And so suddenly you're saying, well, you've got these critical pieces of infrastructure that are the core of your security program, but you're not going to keep a tier 3 engineer around? That seems like a bad idea. So we were faced with that. And as the infrastructure age from 2009, things started reaching end of life, and it's like challenge with what do we do to replace it. We had to figure out what that meant, what we could do, and that's where open source really became an idea of what's out there. And so we started to bite the bullet. Some basic reasons. Why are we looking at it? Yes, I could do some of the functions. Not very well, and frankly, for an enterprise of 120,000 endpoints, roughly, a lot of things that are open, commercially available, they're not open source analogs for. But there are enough that are interesting, and again, it let us shift the focus to where it needed to be. I think my play in all this was, I was smart enough to recognize when my engineers came with their shiny eyes and they saw that this was really something cool that they could do, I was smart enough to say, let's pilot it, start working down it. And so we the idea is we can keep them engaged and focused, and they're building something that they want to do. It's a little easier to keep the retention that is part of the government staffing model. It also lets us work with other agencies who are in similar budget crunches. We can't buy things as freely, and it lets us be a lot more agile. We're able to respond quickly when there's something new that we want to add. We're not tied to a delivery cycle that is a commercial vendor release. So these are some of the reasons why. But really, the morale, I think, was key to it. At the end of the day, trying to sell a model where we're doing something that our engineers own and are part of it is a huge plus for them. So, where'd we start? Two common tools, Bro, Security Onion. Bro is a really, really flexible platform. We've been very happy with what it does. We started with just limited deployment, basically kicking the tires, putting in a couple of the agencies what we had higher risk areas in. We know, for example, our Foreign Agriculture Service is a highly desirable target, a high-value asset, just by the nature of their mission. And so when people want to talk about what are things that are of interest at USDA, again, the interest in other countries in what is coming out of foreign ag in terms of commodities, in terms of trade, makes this a natural place to start. And that's what we did. We rolled in Bro sensors. We were able to repurpose hardware. And again, that's part of the cost model. That's also part of the flexibility of what we could do. We have to work in partnership as a department with our component agency, IT teams, and security teams. So that was part of the socialization of all this, is really finding that coalition of the willing, that their engineers are willing to work on it too, because they also, recognize they had a challenge, and, the larger ticket purchase in a 2-year budget cycle that is the government model does not get them where they need to go when they know they're being hit regularly and repeatedly. Open source can, not the software, but the procurement model fits the challenges, lets government respond much more quickly than the formal process of, identifying requirements, putting out a solicitation, going through the cycle that, again, your industry, this pain. It lets us be a little quicker on our feet. So we just started with Bro. Like I said, we had limited, good initial success. So we've blown it out now so we can drop sensors across all our agencies. And we've invested enough hardware that we are able to put it at the peering points, the ticks that USDA uses. So we actually have full packet capture, not just the net flows that we had previously. We have the ability to, deploy signatures, internally in minutes across this infrastructure, because the agencies are bought into it, because they are participating, because they have access and equal visibility into what we're sharing. It's sort of, like the previous talk, when you deal with the question of indicators and sharing, what we're dealing with in a federated department is a microcosm of what the government is challenged with. And so you had to buy into the agency's need. You had to be able to make sure you're meeting their need for responsiveness while we're also trying to gather that enterprise view in single pane of glass of what is happening. So we also, I got another slide here on Bro. Again, what it does, it's customizable. It actually exceeds, by orders of magnitude what we were able to gather previously. And for my purposes, at the end of the day, the Bro replaced a commercial solution that had a recurring cost of $1.7 million annually. Replaced that with a sweat equity of a team of engineers coming in around $800K. If that was all they were doing. It's hard to argue with the numbers. And it makes us more effective. I got more slides on what we're seeing. Since Bro launched, we are seeing significant data, but more importantly, we're seeing better data. We're able to be more involved in what are the signatures that we're seeing in the tools, so we know what's firing and what's not. We're able to customize it and detune it, and we're able to, to keep the indicators that we've developed in-house, less than 100, but still, things that are departmental specific, shared across all of our component agencies. Security Onion, same arguments. Again, able to centralize, 25,000 signatures and counting, quick alerting, and the other piece, events sent to ELK for correlation and storage. We ended up retiring our SIM. SIMs are wonderful tools. SIMs also require a team to go with them. And you cannot get away from the fact that a commercial solution will always have that team that is fed, that is very, not cheap. And whenever you want to talk about a new connector for a new technology or a new piece you're adding to your enterprise, that is a challenge if it's not one of the hundreds they've already identified and built into it, and it's just an easy customize. You have to write from scratch. You're talking about weeks to months to get those things developed after you've paid for it. We are we are able to gather the data from our infrastructure, and what we're working on now is gathering the other data. Again, Federated Department is my excuse for all things, but USDA does not have a standard architecture. When you have 34 agencies and offices, you have a wide variety of technologies, tools. You can pick pretty much any function in IT and find almost every vendor somewhere at USDA. So in the face of non-standard standards, the ability of a SIM to incorporate all that, aggregate it, and make it meaningful was a very expensive proposition. So instead, we went with an Elasticsearch solution. Elk, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, 3 open source tools, which is pretty much what I just said. It was very approachable. One of the key factors is, as Elasticsearch is just a glorified query engine. If you know natural language processing, you can handle it. If you know basic SQL queries, you can use it. Kibana can make it pretty, so we start feeding these into scorecards. One of the things we've done as we've been able to move to this is create an executive level scorecard across our component agencies, summarized at the agency head level, so that every 2 weeks we put out a dashboard that shows how the agencies are doing compared to each other. Very effective in bringing attention to bear on it, very effective in motivating even the executives involved to compete with each other, that they want to be able to show that they are improving their score, that they're better than they were, but also, yeah, they're better than those other guys. Visualization tools have been hugely important, and it scales. I've got some numbers here. We are, I think, 40 billion records and counting. Yep, got it right. All right. So we got standard idea types. We continue to evolve the ingest that goes into Elk to other things. We've just got a connector online to bring in some of our data centers' database metrics into the space. And that's really the promise of and this is somebody else's talk, I'm sure, but what the tool lets us do as a big data lake is create a space where you can bring these things in and let them start enriching each other. It breaks the limitations you have in a SIM where you get the reports that the SIM supports, and anything that's custom costs time, costs money. So we look for how do we ingest, how do we visualize, numbers if you think it's cool. But again, the key thing here to me is we can keep enriching the data, not just with other security data, but operational data. What's happening with the databases, what's happening, with the network traffic, what's happening with, a mission area. We've been able to overlay, here's our high value assets. So we have a means now, when we talk about how do you filter out false positives or how do you make sure your indicator is useful, we can apply a filter that says, here are all the events being generated and all the alerts that are being pushed. Here are the high value assets, and the intersection of those two lets us say, there's where we focus first. So for a system that's generating 10 to 15,000 critical events in the raw, per day, you need to quickly downscale, and that's what we're able to do. At the same time, one of the challenges of security is always to show our return on investment. We are able to make, and we have opened this up for agencies to start doing operational monitoring. And that sounds like an obvious thing, except really there was not a good enterprise or even a localized solution. Agencies don't know necessarily what's happening with some of their own major applications. They know what's reported from the app itself, but in terms of the ability to monitor traffic to or from, not just from a security vantage point, but even from a performance standpoint. We've been successful in debugging some major challenges that people were seeing odd performance anomalies. One would trace back to the fact that they had included a time server that was OCONUS, developer slip. But things that weren't easily visible from within the app or the application support team, we now can make that available. So security is not just serving security's needs, we're serving the operational need. That's what we're able to do with the solution. We continue to grow it. The advantage too is we can do that as funds are available. We've got a model. I should have added, we didn't just make this up on our own. I'd like to say we're that good, but we went to the smart people. We went to DARPA and worked with them for a year to develop the models and the architecture behind this. As a government resource, they're free to us. You can't beat that kind of consulting. And so we've got a harder architecture that we can extend as funds are available. Again, in government, that's always an interesting question. But as I get funds, and you know the cycle. At the beginning of the year, well, there's a CR, you get your funds, aren't you? Once you get them, you got limited time to spend, hit summertime, windows close. Come September, there's always seems to be money. People say, oh, we didn't realize we had excess. Got to move this. This model lets me make use of those funds whenever they arise. There's what we plan for, there's the wish list we'd like to extend to, and we can respond. Eventually, we hope to push this into a larger, longer-term solution. One of the challenges by this solution is we have roughly a 30-day retention. Elk is built for speed. We're also rolling Hadoop out as a long-term storage space. Hadoop is a much more data-dense solution. So when we talk about wanting a 2-year model, when you're dealing with things like APTs, it is that low, slow burn that you need larger data sets for. So we are looking at that as a second layer of resource. Once we have it aggregated to the Kibana space, it's much simpler to roll that into Hadoop and call that a storage area. One of the agencies has even approached us already as a cost savings offer. If and as we have it up, they want to use us for their long-term log retention. So that gives me a revenue stream. Not going to get rich off it, but it helps defray some of the costs. It helps them meet their mission need of log retention under the NARA schedules. And it helps us be useful. It helps security be more than just security, but operational resource. And phishing, this is the other big piece of was supposed to be the talk today. I've drifted from my agenda a bit, but we are using an open source phishing tool, anti-phishing tool, sorry. Key difference, isn't it? So we, as everyone, has been hit by a lot of phishing activity. We've got things that are going on. 2,000 reports is conservative, frankly. Especially the last several months, they seem to follow the news cycles as to what makes good bait. So there's always fresh bait. 7 per month, again, are the confirmed. Yes, they got it. Yes, they clicked on it. Yes, we've got to go clean up. I would easily add a 0 behind that and not be surprised. Again, 120,000 people. I could probably add a 1 or 2 in front of it also. So, trying to educate people, how do we do anti-phishing? We first went with a commercial response, small scale. The tool and the contractor run it were $239,000 a year. As we looked at it, and we looked at what we're trying to get done, these are our goals for what we're after. My engineers, got off my engineers, they came back and said, we could do this. I said, yeah, well, we could do it cheaper. Now you have my attention. So, part of it was we had to learn the cycle of what it is we wanted to know out of phishing. So we wanted a baseline, because there's a lot of things you could talk about in anti-phishing to know what is effective, what is not. Yes, it's a user education exercise, but it's also, we had to work with our mail client. All of our emails out in the cloud. What were the protections they could apply? What would the effects be? How effective were they? So part of our baseline cycle period of the first year was just cycling through the different mail controls they could put on for suspected phish or suspected malware, and what did people respond to. So we did a whole time series of trigger response on those controls to see which were effective and how we worked out. Not surprisingly, the single most effective one is obfuscating the URL link. Don't let them click it, make them retype it. Everything else, yeah, they're useful, but first and foremost. There were some challenges around that, honestly. There was some pushback from the agencies, some pushback from our component unions. We're spending people's time on training. Don't you know there's whatever the urgency of the day is happening at this time? In general, you know, I've said most of this already, I think. You know, we're able to do a lot of what we do. We're able to be very agile. We're able to invest in our feds as the engineers of you know, second and third tier resolution. It takes a lot of discipline. You know, some of the trade-offs we want to talk about. Yes, there are companies who have bought, you know, or offer releases of some of the open source code, Elasticsearch, for example, who will also offer to support it. And then it depends on your tolerance for risk, where you land on how much of that you want to buy in. The ability to self-train is key. I could not have done this without my engineers. I give them full credit and credence for seeing what was possible, but also being motivated to learn the pieces and work as a team to bring that together. Creating a community to support it, that's a truism for any technology, but even more so because there is a certain hesitancy in people's minds. You know, you buy a commercial product, you know, especially a big name product that has lots of, you know, market and good press. People feel confident in that. Telling them you're going to roll your own, people hedge. My CIOs were not certain that was a bet they wanted to place. We had to convince them what we were able to do, how we were able to do it, show them an incremental role, but also show them the community support across the department. That it wasn't just my team saying this is a way to go. This was, you know, multiple teams, multiple agencies saying, yeah, we want to try this. You know, flexibility, yes. Difficult to evaluate. Again, I warned you, these are prepared by my engineers too. Yeah, you have to have requirements, you have to document requirements, and you have to make them document things. Good Lord. If you have to convince an engineer of the importance of documentation, well, that's every day. But that is critical to making sure this survives, because I do recognize that is, you know, I've shifted some of my risk to maintaining that pool of expertise. Feds leave too. There's nothing magic about the color of the paycheck. And it is a risk of making sure this is a sustainable, viable program. And you have to keep them interested, to the points at the bottom there. You know, cybersecurity is kind of, in my mind, I like to say it's the home for aging, gifted children. And there is that question of keeping enough engagement around the initiative to make sure they're going to keep working it, growing it, building it. They're not just going to drop it because now there's some other new project. You got to keep bringing them back. And we've answered this in part by a continual training program. Not just my team, but bringing folks in. So we put this out internally in what's called Ag Opportunities. It's an internal USDA, well, there's formal internships, but then there's also just volunteer time. People can spend up to 20% of their day, you know, working on another project. And we put out the fact we were doing, you know, big data and cybersecurity, and got, not surprisingly, a lot of interest. Sure, some folks are going, yeah, that's 2 resume checks, I'm in. But it gave us a lot of eyes to see if what we're doing made sense. The whole point of open source is you benefit from that, so that's where we drive. What are we doing elsewhere? Yeah, we replace SIM. Our big data pilot continues. And again, not overselling what I'm doing. I recognize we're dealing with big data as an engineering challenge just to build the data lake. There's a whole different layer of analytics, and that's where our time with DARPA has been useful, is to help recognize we've got a long road ahead of us still. But what we can do now with the anti-phishing work, with the big data work, with the sensors, is we've established that we can sustain this as an enterprise-scale program. to fill in some of the gaps that we have with our traditional tools, that even, frankly, around the Continuous Diagnostic Mitigation Program, CDM, that DHS is pushing. There'll be a whole set of commercial tools coming. We're looking forward to that. Within that tool set, the architecture calls for a Splunk deployment that DHS is paying for, so I'm very excited about that. But my safety net is, as that's established and built, we're getting a secondary feed into our space so that we can, again, enrich what we have in our data lake with all that new data and make CDM that much more powerful. So we're filling in gaps. And it lets us, right now we're working R as our language for reporting. There are other choices. The phishing exercise, I talked about this already. We're able to shift from a commercial contract to an open source, save some cost, and then lets us customize it. Not just in terms of trying different bait, but trying different pools. As we get the phishing results in, and we're also bringing in normalized HR data, PII accepted, of course, but we're able to start looking at not just which fish, which bait, which controls, but which user communities. This is something that, because we have that flexibility, we can start asking more interesting questions. Is a lab scientist more likely to click on a fish than a forest ranger or a secretary? Where are your pools of challenge? How do we then focus on educating according to those different risk formulation that people have? Who has got the most risky behavior? Again, this is just starting to scratch the surface of what the science can show us, but there's a lot out there that we're able to deal with. We can put this on VMs, we can put it on physical hardware. We're able to actually repurpose some old appliances for some of the deployments, because a tiny OS can go on anything. We put the dashboard results out to our executives. Oh, GoFish. I never did mention the package name. Sorry. But yeah, again, all this is great because a SOC can do it. But the more important thing is we can take this back out to our executives and show them the results of what we're doing. That we can show them where this is effective as not just security, but as the OCIO feeding the larger need for data about what works and what are our risks. With the new executive order talking about our risk management structure, we're able to overlay the cyber framework that is at the heart of that also into our data lake, so that becomes a way to start aggregating reporting. So the information we have naturally fits into that format. So now it flows. So now we can talk about risk around mission, agency, money, program, function, and at any level we can drill down to the cybersecurity risk that is feeding back to that. That linkage is going to be huge under the executive order activities. And the analysis is, I hate to sound like a fanboy, but it's almost limitless. You can do so much with it because it's just a pile of data. We've got it out of our when you had our SIM solution space, it was a closed environment. Getting to the data to do things that weren't predefined was a huge challenge. So we're able to break down what goes on in email and what we're talking about. Again, the slides I assume will be available. We'll find out. Yes, at some point after this. But the details are in there in terms of what we break down and what we're able to show. Summarizing, what are the lessons learned? What did we find? I think I've hit most of these. Yes, they do take extra time. Yes, staff training and self-training experimentation is important. Government, we don't do that very well. That's a sad reality. Our traditional HR system ties people into traditional position descriptions, which say, here is the box you work in and do those things. To truly, in my mind, be effective at open source, I've had to be very flexible with how we task and track people's work and people's time. that we allow failures, that there were, a couple of hardware, failures. It's an okay thing, but you have to be willing as management to allow that. I guess maybe that's a risk statement on my part that, when I go commercial, yeah, I know I can hold you accountable to delivery of X. There's contracts and lots of lawyers behind all that. When you go open source, I don't have that stick. So I've got to be a lot more willing to tolerate the false starts that have come through on it. And that's it. So. I didn't know that was my summary slide, but all right. Were there any questions or comments before we break? Yes. There's a microphone in the center of the room.
Chris, in terms of the phishing, do you see a lot of those links going direct to IP addresses, and have you looked at any ways of using DNS as a mitigation?
Good question, yes. Some of the studies we've looked at, obviously IP reputation scoring has been very effective, particularly if you know it, because a lot of these are just the quick smash and grab. The domain pops up for 24, 48 hours, dumps it out. That was something we were able to work with our mail vendor and filter that layer. So we insist on reputation scores, and I think a 72-hour persistence before we let them in. Interestingly enough, what we also proved in anti-phishing is that good bait will always work. The closer you get, you can say a senior official caught in scandal, people might click on it. The senior official in your program was caught in a scandal, the rates go, close to 80%. We did that to a previous CFO. So, other questions? Cool. Well, thank you for your time. I hope this was useful.